Hi, everyone. So this talk will be about leveraging SLOs for your CI/CD pipelines with Keptn. So there's a lot of things to cover in that talk. So without further ado, let's get started. So first, what I want is to establish a context. So what kind of problem? What are the problems that we're trying to solve? And this came from surveys and discussion we had with customers. We also did some kind of introspection work within our own development team. This to realize that continuous delivery pipelines are becoming very difficult to manage. So what happens is you start building a delivery pipeline, and after a while, it becomes more and more customized, and it requires an increasing effort to integrate with tooling. But there's also the problem of the separation of concerns. So the pipelines, they're kind of like monoliths. There's a mix of information and dependencies about the processes, the platform they target, the environments, for example, dev, staging, production, and the tools that they integrate with. So also, like as continuous delivery expands within your organization, and at the same time as you evolve toward microservices architecture, there's a multiplication in the number of pipelines. In typical DevOps approach, you're going to have pipelines used by different teams, and each will customize those pipelines in their own ways, which makes those pipelines even harder to manage and maintain. So not only the delivery pipelines are multiplying and getting more difficult to manage, but the thing is they spend most of their time sitting and waiting for approval, which involves a lot of manual work and is also something that's very error prone. So wasted time and undetected defect, this is really what is killing a delivery pipeline. So the solution is really to automate that part and try to reduce the time with automation, the time to delivery. And while also, you know, if we're doing a good job, we're also reducing the chances of delivering a bad release. So with those kind of challenges in mind, what can we use to overcome those challenges, to achieve the goals? And Google's book on site reliability engineering has been a catalyst to have SREs, performance DevOps engineers incorporate concepts such as service level indicators, or SLIs. So what's a SLI? SLI is a measure of some metrics of the service. So for example, a 95th percentile of your service's response time. There's also the concept of service level objective, or SLO. And SLO is a target value or range of values for an SLI. For example, a response time must not exceed 200 milliseconds during peak load. So that's an example of an SLO. So those concepts are great in production monitoring to ensure your organization meet their SLAs or service level agreements. But things is, you know, we've also been seeing that the same kind of concept starts shifting left into continuous delivery pipelines. So to be more concrete, you know, we've been seeing organizations wanted to start evaluating every build against their SLOs and let the result act as a quality gate before the build is promoted to the next stage of the pipeline and eventually to production. So what we taught, you know, at Dynatrace is about like what can we do to formalize that process. So collect metrics, generate a, you know, corresponding to the SLIs, generate a score based on the SLOs, and then using that score to make a decision whether to the build should move to the next stage or whether it should not. It should be rolled back. So what we've done is not only identifying those kind of problems and find out theoretical solution, but we implemented this capability in a platform, and that platform is Keptn. So Keptn, what it is, it's an open source platform. It's an event-based framework. It's agnostic to the tools that you might be using in your organization. And because it is open source, what we hope is that the practitioners, they will extend Keptn with new capabilities instead of continuing to build custom implementation. So I've talked about SLIs and SLOs, and we've implemented those concepts in Keptn as part of our automated quality gate service that we call Lighthouse. Picking up SLIs and SLOs, it's, you know, from scratch, it's not really always an easy task. You will have to think, you will have to discuss with different stakeholders, you'll have to try to find consensus, which might never happen. But it does have to be perfect at first. Like you just want to get started with whatever you have and take an iterative approach, and you want to refine at every iteration. For example, you just need to look at the different monitoring tools that you might have in your organization and what is used by people for analysis, which most likely is dashboards, and whether they come from Grafana, or they come from Kibana, or they come from commercial solutions such as Dynatrace, New Relic, or Splunk, for example. The metrics that you have on those dashboards will often be good candidates for SLI. So you'll have to find a way to extract those from your tool using whatever API and query language that's available and add those to your SLIs. So SLIs that will be defined as YAML file. You can start with such simple SLIs like response time or failure rates or CPU usage or things as such. If you have an APM solution, you may want also to get sophisticated SLIs, such as response time for a specific business transaction. For example, when you use a login, or the number of database calls, or exception are thrown when such a business transaction is executed during test. So you also have your SLOs defined in YAML, and where you can combine static and dynamic threshold, which will compare the SLIs with values from previous builds. For example, I want to compare my measure that I have during that test with the same measure that I have during the test that was executed for the previous build. So you can always start with something simple, such as a SLO of a 10% variation with the SLI within the SLI value from the previous build. So you're looking at the measure now and say, well, it shouldn't vary more than 10% versus the same measure for the previous build. So then what you have is you have your CI/CD platform send a command to Keptn Lighthouse, the quality gate, saying like start evaluating that service for 30 minutes using these SLIs and SLO definition as YAML files. Keptn will query the SLI providers. And the SLI providers, like they can be implemented for different solutions. For example, like we have one for Dynatrace, we have one for Prometheus, we have one for Neoload. You can also build your own SLI provider, so that's also things that's possible with Keptn. And then what we'll do is that we'll calculate a score for that SLI. And the score are weighted. So one SLI, for example, can have a weight of 2 versus the other one, which means also that the score will have twice an influence on the total score. This also means that a build can still pass the evaluation, even if some of its SLIs are below SLOs. So in the end, a total score is calculated, and that score is either pass or fail, or it can also be a warning, which could mean a human intervention is needed to approve or reject the build. Now, if you do this instead of manually analyzing and comparing dashboard from one build to another, the Keptn Lighthouse service will do that comparison for you. It looks at the metrics and compare them with previous build or threshold, like I just explained, that you have defined in your SLO file, and calculate the overall confidence score. So SLIs versus SLO. Is it good enough to pass? Is it bad enough to fail? Or is it a bit in between and might need additional assessment from like an approval from human? So what we see here in the right is a visualization from a Keptn service called the Bridge. And the Bridge, what it does, that it's first, like it offers traceability over events, but also it provides things such as like that heat map here. So where we can see the SLIs on the y-axis and the bill over time on the x-axis. And also we have a chart with the SLIs, so the SLIs can be charted. That's what we can see below. So of course you might want to have this kind of information instead in your own CI/CD tool. If you don't use the full Keptn platform to manage your deployment and delivery, and this is all available via API, which is how we implemented integrations, such as, for example, we have an integration with GitLab, we have an integration with Jenkins, and this was done via the API. So now we've seen the quality gates, how it works in Keptn, and how this can be used on its own. Which means, for example, you can have a CI/CD platform, for example, again, Jenkins, implementing the pipeline, doing the deployments for each stage, and running tests. And in that case, you can use the Keptn quality gates in standalone mode instead of the full-blown platform. So in that case, Keptn will manage your CLIs, your CLOs, using a GitOps approach. Jenkins will trigger the quality gates by sending Keptn a message, which is going to be an event, and Keptn will perform the evaluation and scoring and send the result back to Jenkins, which is going to be like a pass or fail. But you still have the problem of managing pipelines and the integration within Jenkins. The problem which becomes more complex as you're adding more pipelines with microservices. And also, you have to think about, like, what happens if you want to change a tool? For example, if I want to change a testing tool, what happens if I want to change a monitoring tool? So as I mentioned earlier, those pipelines are kind of like monoliths. So what we thought is you need to decouple the processes from the implementation and tooling and remove the dependencies between the task and the process. So what we do is, in the Keptn platform, is we use eventing. The process is defined in a declarative way without implementation or tooling details because these are decoupled, as we see here. And it defines each task and which event it triggers or process. So in Keptn, there would be events like configuration change. There would be events like this one here, which is a deploy event. There would be a test finish event. There would be evaluation done event. And the service, so these events will be generated here, and they will be sent to this service, which will consume the events, and will know what to do with the events, how to do things. So let's now look quickly at the architecture of this. So this starts with what we call a control plane, and the control plane can be controlled via an API that we see here. And a control plane is using well-defined events that are sent to services to execute workflows on artifacts, builds, microservices. So what we obtain with this is the separation of concerns, where your DevOps team, for example, who is responsible for defining which tool should be used, they can customize Keptn and say, I want to use this specific tool to handle this particular event for this type of project, and if later, say a year from now, you want to switch to another test tool. For example, you're currently using JMeter, and in the future, you might want to switch to Neoload. Then you don't need to change all of your pipelines where, before this integration, it was hard-coded. So what you need to do is you just change uniform, and uniform is defined in a YAML file, like we see here. On top of this, we also have the ability to define the application plane. And this is the actual delivery and operation process, and this is typically done by a different group of people. What they do is that they define process like how many stages, what type of deployment, is it for that specific stage, is it going to be a direct or blue-green deployment, what is the testing strategy for that stage, is it going to be a functional test, is it going to be a performance test, a security test, and that is defined in the shipyard file that we see here. So we get that clear separation via the control plane of the tools on the bottom and the process on top. And now if a developer comes in and say, hey, wow, that's awesome, and I now have a platform allowing me to move my artifact through a well-defined process with the right tools, well, you can just say, hey, Keptn, here's an artifact, and just do what you have to do with it. So as you can see, Keptn is part of the continuous integration and delivery section of the CNCF. So this is something important for us because Keptn is now listing among other CNCF projects such as Kubernetes, Elm, Istio, and Cloud Events. And all of those projects are currently using the Keptn platform. And in addition to being added to the CNCF landscape, the Keptn ecosystem and community is growing very quickly. So the development of Keptn is founded by Dynatrace, but independent from the product itself. And the Keptn project is now receiving contribution from customers and partners, for example, Avodac, Intuit, Citrix, and Neotis. Those are examples. Of course, there's a lot of things like it's in that presentation. So I think the best is, like, if you're interested, is just give Keptn a try. There's a variety of tutorials available on the web site. So you just need to get a Kubernetes cluster. You can get even a promo code if you want to run Keptn on Gkey from our website. And well, that's pretty much it. Like, so that was fast. I know that was a lot to digest in a short amount of time, but if you are interested to know more, I would strongly encourage you to look at the website and also to join the Keptn community. So yeah, let's open up for a Q&A.
Thank you, Steve. We've got a couple of questions. We've got about a 4-minute buffer, I think, on Q&A. So a couple of quick ones. How do we make sure our tests are matching production-like environments? Is there any way or tooling to reproduce production usage to ensure our score is based on production? Sorry, Steve, looks like we can't hear your audio there. I can see you speaking, but I can't hear your audio.
Yeah,
that's better.
Myself. Would be better. All right. Yeah. So yeah, I heard the question. So the answer for that would be, yeah, you need to. So that's where you define your SLO. So the idea is that you probably would want to look at what are your objectives as far as like when you want to test. You're going to look if you're able to capture some information, some meaningful information from your production environment, such as things such as, for example, when I want to perform a test that will simulate a specific transaction or business transaction in my environment. What are the things that I want to make sure of? Like, is there, like, for example, I'm making like 30-day based calls. So that's the one thing that I would like to define in my SLOs. Normally, from one build to the other, when I do those tests, I should be doing those 30-day based calls, for example, or something like the number of exception, or maybe the CPU usage. So if you've got like some kind of monitoring that capture that in production, then you can extract that data and then build your SLOs based on what you can observe in production and what you try to achieve during tests.
Correct. And we've got time for one, maybe two more. How do we account for expected changes in performance due to application changes without generating alarms or red dashboards?
So the idea is, in that case, is that you want to be able to. There's going to be cases where you're going to receive like errors or like a notification if there's changes in your environment, and it's normal. Like, this is something like you might want to have a human intervention. So we want to automate the quality gates for cases where there are an expected variation, but if there's like a change that is something that you change in your environment, then yeah, you're going to maybe have the build or your pipeline that's going to be stopped, and then you're going to have a human. You're going to send a notification to a human, and then human will take a look at this and say, okay, I know why this has been stopped. This is something that's expected. So now I want to restart like the pipeline. Or maybe if it's already something that you have planned, because you say, well, we've been making some significant changes. So at one point when it's going to reach one of the quality gates, we know that's going to be a problem. Then you can change the way that the approbation will be done from, like, for example, automated to manual. So you can have someone take a look at it.
And just one final one, then we'll jump on here. Is Keptn or any other tools able to discover and reconfigure monitoring tools for initial discovery and setup of KPI/SLIs?
Not currently in Keptn. So the idea is that what we implement is our SLI providers. So that's just like interface that will be able to grab the metrics, the SLIs from the different monitoring tools, but there's no configuration part. So the configuration is more like on your side, on your DevOps team, that will work with the whatever monitoring tools that you have, and making sure that those metrics are available, and then using the SLI provider that will be able to get those metrics in Keptn. But you still have to make that configuration in your monitoring tool to make sure that those are available.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve.